A black boy from a rental apartment claiming his daddy's a 4-star general. That's the most ridiculous lie I've heard in 23 years of teaching. Mrs. Patricia Whitmore's voice cut through the classroom like a blade. 28 pairs of eyes turned toward the front. She stood there, mid-40s, white, wearing her signature flag pin on her cardigan, holding Lucas Hughes's assignment between 2 fingers like it was contaminated. Her face twisted with disgust. "Class, this is what happens when children value attention over honesty." She didn't whisper it. She announced it. Career Day morning at Jefferson Elementary, Arlington, Virginia, and parents filled the back of the room. Lawyers in suits, doctors in scrubs, a software engineer, a chef in whites. All of them watching as Mrs. Whitmore made an example of a 10-year-old black boy. Lucas sat frozen at his desk, his worn Nikes tucked under the chair. His hands gripped the edges of his seat. He'd written 3 paragraphs about his father. Every single word was true. What Mrs. Whitmore did next would destroy everything she thought she knew about power, about truth, about the assumptions she'd built a career on. She ripped the paper in half. The sound echoed. Students gasped. She ripped it again, and again. Pieces fell like snow onto Lucas's desk, onto his lap, onto his shoes. Then she crumpled them in her fist and walked to the trash can. She dropped them in. Pathetic. Comment where you're listening from. Subscribe to channel. Spartino, let me tell you who Lucas Hughes really was. 10 years old, 4th grade, living in a modest 3-bedroom apartment in Arlington, Virginia, close enough to Fort Myer that you could hear the morning bugle if the windows were open. The Hughes family didn't advertise what they were. No military stickers on the car, no uniform photos on the walls, no flags or plaques or medals displayed in the living room. Security protocol. When you're the child of a 4-star general, you learn early that some truths stay private. Lucas had moved 8 times in his 10 years, 6 different schools. He'd spent birthdays without his father, Thanksgivings, Christmases. Deployments meant months of silence, of wondering if Dad was safe, of watching Mom try to be both parents while working 12-hour shifts as a pediatric surgeon at Walter Reed. But here's what nobody knew. Lucas Hughes wasn't just resilient. He was brilliant. He read at a 9th grade level. He spoke conversational Korean from living in Seoul for 2 years. He understood military strategy better than most adults because he'd grown up listening to his father talk about leadership, about service, about sacrifice. He knew the difference between a 2-star and a 4-star general. He knew what those ranks meant. He knew his father had earned every single one of those stars. And he knew that when he wrote his career day assignment, every word was the truth. Mini cliffhanger. The night before career day, Lucas sat at the kitchen table working on his assignment. His father was in Korea. Strategic planning meetings, classified. Lucas didn't know the details, just that Dad had been gone for 3 weeks and wouldn't be back in time for the presentation. His mother, Dr. Angela Hughes, stood at the counter making coffee in her scrubs. She had early surgery the next morning. "What are you writing, baby?" "About Dad." Lucas looked up. "Mrs. Whitmore said we should write about what our parents do and why it matters." Angela walked over and read over his shoulder. Her hand went to her mouth. "Lucas, it's all true, Mom." "I know it is, sweetheart. But you know how your father feels about keeping a low profile." "But everyone else gets to be proud of their parents." Lucas's voice cracked. "Tyler Bennett gets to talk about his dad meeting senators. Sophia Wilson talks about her mom. Why do I have to hide?" Angela sat down next to him. She took his hands in hers. "You don't have to hide, but you need to understand that some people won't believe you. They'll look at where we live, at how we keep to ourselves, and they'll make assumptions. They'll think you're exaggerating. But I'm not. I know, baby, I know. What Lucas didn't know was that his teacher had already decided he was a liar. Before he even turned in the assignment, before he even read it aloud. Mrs. Whitmore had looked at Lucas Hughes, black, from a rental apartment, shoes a little worn, no social connections in the PTA, and she'd decided that whatever he wrote would be fantasy. That was her first mistake. Jefferson Elementary served everyone. Military families rotating through Fort Myer. Diplomat kids whose parents worked at embassies downtown. Immigrant families. Working-class families whose parents cleaned the buildings where policy got made. It was supposed to be a place where every child mattered. But Mrs. Patricia Whitmore had taught there for 23 years. And in those 23 years, she'd developed a very clear sense of who was telling the truth and who was seeking attention. She knew what generals' families looked like. They lived in nice houses in McLean or Alexandria. They attended military functions. They were connected in the community. Their children showed up in pressed clothes with confident postures. They didn't live in modest apartments. They didn't keep quiet. They didn't look like Lucas Hughes. Every day, Lucas watched her treat students differently. When Tyler Bennett talked about his father's lobbying firm, Mrs. Whitmore's face lit up. How impressive, Tyler. Public service is so important. When Sophia Wilson mentioned her mother cleaned the Capitol building, Mrs. Whitmore's smile went tight. That's nice, Sophia. Now, let's open our textbooks. When Marcus Johnson, a black kid whose dad drove trucks, said his father worked hard, Mrs. Whitmore nodded without looking up. Page 42, everyone. Lucas saw the pattern. He wasn't stupid. He knew that some kids got believed and celebrated, while others got dismissed. It usually depended on skin color and how much money their parents made. But he thought if he just told the truth, if he just wrote it clearly, she'd have to believe him. He had no idea how wrong he was. Mini cliffhanger. Career Day morning arrived with unusual excitement. Parents filed into room 204 at 8:30. Mrs. Whitmore greeted each one with varying levels of enthusiasm. The lawyer got a firm handshake and bright smile. The chef got a polite nod. The nurse got a quick "thank you for your service" before Whitmore turned to arrange chairs. Lucas sat at his desk checking his phone every 30 seconds. His father had texted at 6 a.m. Landed. Catching up on sleep. See you at school by 10. Proud of you, son. 2 more hours. Lucas just had to make it 2 more hours. Class? Mrs. Whitmore clapped her hands. Before our guests present, let's share the paragraphs you wrote. I want our visitors to hear how thoughtfully you described their work. One by one, students stood and read. Tyler Bennett talked about his father's lobbying firm and the important bills they influenced. Mrs. Whitmore beamed like he'd won a Nobel Prize. Sophia Wilson talked about her mother's cleaning work, how she took pride in making buildings shine. Mrs. Whitmore offered a tight smile and moved on quickly. Not important enough. Not impressive enough. Then she called on Lucas. Lucas Hughes, you're next. Lucas stood. His paper shook slightly in his hands. He cleared his throat and began reading in a voice that tried to be steady, but came out small. My dad is a 4-star general in the United States Army. He has served our country for 32 years in places like Iraq, Afghanistan, and Korea. He helps make important decisions to keep America safe. Mrs. Whitmore's expression changed immediately. Her smile vanished. Her eyes went cold. Lucas kept reading, his voice gaining a little confidence. There are only about 40 4-star generals in the whole military. My dad worked his way up from second lieutenant. He says leadership means serving others, not yourself. Stop. The word cut through the classroom like a gunshot. Every student froze. Parents looked up from their phones. Lucas's hands started shaking harder. "Stop right there, Lucas. Come here, please." Lucas walked to the front of the room on legs that felt like water. His heart hammered against his ribs. Every eye in the classroom followed him. Mrs. Whitmore stood slowly from her desk. She crossed her arms. Her voice took on that teacher lecture tone that made everyone's skin crawl. "Class, this is a perfect example of what we call embellishment. It means exaggerating the truth to make yourself seem more important than you are." She turned to Lucas. The other students watched. The parents watched. Everyone watched. "Lucas, I need you to be honest with everyone right now. What does your father actually do?" "He's a general, ma'am." Her eyes narrowed. "Lucas, I have been teaching for 23 years. I have met generals. I have taught generals' children." She let that hang in the air, heavy with implication. "Generals do not live in modest rental apartments. Their children do not attend public schools in worn-out sneakers. Their families are well connected in the community. There are official records, social events, recognition." Lucas felt his face growing hot. Tears burned behind his eyes, but he refused to let them fall. "Not here, not in front of everyone." "But ma'am, my dad keeps a low profile because..." "Because of what? Secret missions?" Her tone dripped with sarcasm. Several students giggled nervously. Tyler Bennett raised his hand. "Mrs. Whitmore, maybe his dad really is..." "Tyler, I appreciate your kindness, but this is a teaching moment." She turned back to Lucas, and her voice got colder, professional, cutting. "I checked with the office yesterday. There is no General Hughes listed on our parent registry. Your father's occupation is listed as government employee. That's very different from a 4-star general, isn't it?" "He puts that on forms for security reasons." Lucas's voice cracked. "He told me..." "Enough." The classroom jumped at her raised voice. "You will sit down right now. You will rewrite this assignment with the truth. And you will apologize to this class and to our guests for wasting everyone's time with fantasy stories. Do you understand me?" Tears spilled down Lucas's cheeks. He couldn't stop them anymore. But he didn't sit down. He stood there, a 10-year-old black boy being called a liar in front of parents and peers, and he said the thing his father taught him to say when people doubted him. "My dad didn't raise a liar, ma'am." The room went completely silent. Mrs. Whitmore's face flushed red. Several parents shifted uncomfortably in their seats. You could hear breathing. You could hear hearts beating. "What did you just say to me?" "My dad is a general. He's flying back from Korea. He'll be here at 10:15. Lucas's voice was stronger now, even through the tears. "You'll see." That's when Mrs. Whitmore made her second mistake. She didn't believe him. She didn't verify. She didn't call the office to double-check. She didn't pause to consider that maybe, just maybe, this child was telling the truth. She assumed. Mini cliffhanger. "To the principal's office. Now." Deshaun Williams, Lucas's best friend, stood up from his desk. "But Mrs. Whitmore, Lucas isn't lying. I've seen..." "Deshaun, sit down before you join him." Deshaun sank back into his chair, shooting Lucas an apologetic look. Lucas grabbed his backpack. As he walked toward the door, Mrs. Whitmore delivered her final blow. She said it loud enough for everyone to hear, loud enough to make sure it landed, loud enough to destroy him. "Class, let this be a lesson. Honesty and humility are virtues we cherish. Making yourself seem more important than you are, especially when you come from certain backgrounds, is the opposite of character." She paused, letting her words sink in. There is no shame in being ordinary. The shame is in lying about it, especially when you come from a community that already struggles with stereotypes about honesty. Every parent heard it. Every student heard it. The implicit racism in her words hung in the air like smoke. She'd just told an entire classroom that black children from modest backgrounds couldn't be trusted, that they exaggerated, that they lied to seem special. And nobody stopped her. Lucas walked out of that classroom with his head down, tears streaming, destroyed in front of everyone who mattered. What Mrs. Whitmore didn't know, what she couldn't have known because she never bothered to verify, was that 3 black SUVs were already en route to Jefferson Elementary. That the Fort Myer Protocol Office had called Principal Hayes 30 minutes earlier to confirm security arrangements. That a 4-star general in full dress uniform was about to walk through her classroom door. And when he did, everything she thought she knew about Lucas Hughes, about truth, about the assumptions she'd built a career on, would shatter like glass. That was her biggest mistake. The hallway felt longer than usual. Lucas walked slowly toward the principal's office, his sneakers squeaking against the polished floor. Behind him, he could hear Mrs. Whitmore's voice resuming the career day introductions, as if nothing had happened. As if she hadn't just humiliated him in front of everyone. He pulled out his phone. Still no new messages from his dad. Probably still sleeping after that 14-hour flight from Korea. Lucas thought about texting him, about telling him what just happened. But what would he say? That his teacher called him a liar? That nobody believed him? His dad had enough to worry about. Lucas didn't want to seem weak. He slipped the phone back into his pocket and kept walking. Through the main office window, Lucas spotted Principal Hayes on the phone. She was nodding seriously, her expression focused. She glanced at a folder on her desk, then looked up and made eye contact with Lucas through the glass. Her eyes widened slightly, like she recognized him, like she knew something. But she was mid-conversation, so she just gave him a small nod and returned to her call. Lucas wondered if Mrs. Whitmore had already called ahead to complain about him. Mini cliffhanger. Vice Principal Thornton handled the meeting. Principal Hayes was still on that phone call, her office door closed. Mr. Thornton was a white man in his 50s who'd been at Jefferson Elementary for 15 years. He wore khakis and a blue polo shirt with the school logo. He had the kind of face that always looked slightly disappointed. "Sit down, Lucas." Lucas sat in the chair across from Thornton's desk. It was too big for him. His feet barely touched the floor. "So," Thornton began, opening a folder. "Mrs. Whitmore tells me you disrupted class and refused to correct false information in your assignment." "Sir, it's not false. My dad really is—" "Lucas." Thornton held up a hand. "I pulled your file. Your father is listed as Vincent Hughes. Occupation, government employee. That's what's in our system." "That's what he writes on forms, sir, for security reasons. He's not supposed to—" "Security reasons." Thornton chuckled. Not meanly, but like an adult humoring a child's imagination. "Lucas, I understand wanting your father to seem important. A lot of kids do that. But making up elaborate stories about generals and classified information, I'm not making it up." Lucas's voice came out louder than he intended. Thornton's face hardened. "Lower your voice. You're already in trouble, son. Don't make it worse." Lucas's phone buzzed in his pocket. He pulled it out quickly, desperate for anything that might help him. A text from his dad. "Running late. Briefing at Pentagon got moved up. Be there by 10:30. Hang tight." Lucas's heart leaped. He showed the phone to Thornton, his hands shaking. "See? He's coming. He'll be here in less than an hour." Thornton barely glanced at the screen. His expression didn't change, not even a flicker of doubt. "Lucas, I can't verify anything from a text message. You could have anyone's number saved as Dad in your contacts." The dismissal in his voice made Lucas's stomach drop. "But here's what's going to happen." Thornton leaned forward, elbows on his desk. "You're going to return to class. You're going to apologize to Mrs. Whitmore for being disrespectful. You're going to rewrite that assignment with truthful information, and then we're going to move forward. Understood? Lucas felt his hands beginning to shake. You don't believe me. I believe you want attention, Lucas. I understand that impulse. Kids from single-parent homes or families where parents work multiple jobs sometimes create stories to feel special. It's a cry for help, really. My parents are married. My mom's a surgeon at Walter Reed. My dad. That's enough. Thornton stood, his chair scraped against the floor. Return to class right now, or I will call your parents in for a formal disciplinary conference. And trust me, you don't want that on your record. Lucas stood slowly. His vision blurred with tears he refused to let fall. Not in front of this man. Not when he'd already been called a liar twice in one morning. My father serves this country, sir. He's been deployed 6 times. He's earned the right to be believed. Thornton's expression softened slightly, but only slightly, like he felt bad for a delusional child. Go back to class, Lucas. What happened next would change everything. When Lucas returned to room 204, everything had changed. Parents now filled the back and sides of the classroom, sitting in a semicircle of borrowed chairs. Career day was in full swing. Mrs. Whitmore stood at the front, introducing Mr. Bennett. We're so grateful to have these distinguished guests with us today. Mr. Bennett works with some of the most powerful people in Washington. Let's give him our full attention. Applause rippled through the room. Lucas slid into his seat as quietly as possible, trying to disappear, trying to become invisible. Deshawn leaned over and whispered, You okay? Before Lucas could answer, Mrs. Whitmore's voice cut across the room like a knife. Lucas, do you have something to share with the class? Every head turned. Students, parents, everyone stared. Ma'am? Your apology. Lucas felt his stomach drop to his shoes. The room went completely silent. This wasn't just his classmates anymore. There were adults here, professional people, watching him be humiliated. Watching a 10-year-old black boy being forced to apologize for telling the truth. I don't have anything to apologize for, ma'am. The room gasped. Several parents exchanged glances. Some looked uncomfortable. Others looked at Lucas like he was being disrespectful. Like he was the problem. Mrs. Whitmore's jaw tightened. Excuse me? In front of our honored guests, you're going to continue this defiance? Tyler's mother, Ms. Bennett, a lawyer in a gray suit, spoke up gently. Perhaps we should let the child explain. I appreciate your concern, Ms. Bennett, but classroom management is my responsibility. Mrs. Whitmore's smile was tight and professional, but her eyes were hard. She turned back to Lucas. You have 2 choices, young man. You can apologize right now and rewrite your assignment with honest information. Or you can spend the rest of career day sitting in the office while your classmates enjoy our guests. Which will it be? Lucas's voice cracked when he spoke. When my dad gets here, your father is not coming, Lucas. The words echoed through the classroom like a slap. Parents shifted in their seats. Some students looked down at their desks. Mrs. Whitmore continued, her voice taking on a tone of forced patience. The kind adults use when they're trying to be kind while destroying you. Sweetheart, I understand this is hard, but the truth is your father probably works a regular government job. Maybe at the VA, maybe at a military base doing paperwork. Those are perfectly respectable positions. She walked closer to his desk. Every step felt like a hammer. But you've created this fantasy about generals in Korea and important decisions because you're embarrassed. I get it. You see Tyler's dad meeting with senators, and you want your family to seem just as important. Her voice dropped, quieter now, but somehow more cutting, more devastating. But Lucas, There is no shame in being ordinary. The shame is in lying about it, especially when you come from a community that already struggles with stereotypes about honesty. Ms. Bennet stood up. Mrs. Whitmore, I really don't think— Please, Ms. Bennet, sit down. The lawyer sat slowly, her expression troubled. Like she wanted to say something but didn't know how. Like she was watching something wrong happen, but felt powerless to stop it. Deshawn muttered under his breath, This is so messed up. What was that, Deshawn? Nothing, ma'am. Deshawn Williams, I heard you. Office, now. But I didn't. Now. Deshawn grabbed his backpack and walked out, giving Lucas one last look of solidarity before disappearing into the hallway. Lucas was alone now, completely isolated in a room full of people. Mrs. Whitmore stood over him, arms crossed, waiting for his apology. The other parents looked away, uncomfortable, but unwilling to intervene. Nobody was coming to help him. Nobody was going to stand up for him. The clock on the wall showed 9:28 a.m. His father would arrive in approximately 1 hour. But right now, in this moment, Lucas Hughes had never felt smaller in his entire life. Mini cliffhanger. He looked down at his desk, at the empty space where his assignment had been before she tore it up. His hands gripped the edge of the desk until his knuckles went pale. And then he did something that surprised everyone, including himself. He stood up. Ma'am, he said quietly, my name is Lucas Hughes. My father is General Vincent Hughes. He's a 4-star general in the United States Army. He served for 32 years. And when he gets here, you're going to owe me an apology. Mrs. Whitmore's face flushed deep red. Sit down. No, ma'am. The room held its breath. Lucas Hughes, if you do not sit down right now. The classroom door opened. Principal Hayes stepped inside, slightly out of breath, her face flushed. She looked directly at Mrs. Whitmore, and her voice left no room for argument. Mrs. Whitmore. Hallway. Immediately. The tone of her voice made it clear this wasn't a request. It was an order. Mrs. Whitmore blinked in surprise. Principal Hayes, I'm in the middle of— Now, Patricia. Every parent in the room noticed the use of her first name. That never happened. Principal Hayes didn't do that. Not in front of students. Not unless something was seriously wrong. Mrs. Whitmore followed Principal Hayes into the hallway. The door closed behind them with a soft click that sounded like thunder. Through the small window in the door, students could see them talking. Principal Hayes's face was serious, more serious than anyone had ever seen. Mrs. Whitmore's expression shifted from confusion to shock to something that looked like fear. Lucas sat back down, his heart pounding so hard he could hear it in his ears. Whatever was happening out there, it had to do with him. The clock ticked forward. 9:30 a.m. What happened next would destroy Mrs. Patricia Whitmore's entire world view. In the hallway, Principal Hayes kept her voice low but firm, the kind of low that meant she was controlling her anger with great effort. Patricia, we have a situation. Mrs. Whitmore crossed her arms defensively. If this is about Lucas Hughes, I was simply maintaining classroom standards. The boy was clearly— I just spent 20 minutes on the phone with Fort Myers Protocol Office. The words hung in the air like a bomb that hadn't exploded yet. Mrs. Whitmore blinked. Protocol Office? Yes. They called because we have a very distinguished visitor arriving at our school. Hayes pulled out her phone, showing Whitmore an email. They needed to confirm our security clearances, parking arrangements, and whether we could accommodate a security detail. Mrs. Whitmore's face went pale. Security detail? For career day? For Lucas Hughes's father. The hallway seemed to tilt. Everything went quiet except for the sound of Mrs. Whitmore's heart hammering in her chest. "Lucas. Lucas Hughes?" "Yes, Patricia." Principal Hayes's voice was ice. "The 10-year-old boy you publicly humiliated this morning for supposedly lying about his father being a 4-star general." "Oh my God." "The boy you sent to my office? The boy whose assignment you tore up? The boy you accused of making up stories because of where he lives and how he looks?" Mrs. Whitmore's hand went to her mouth. She couldn't breathe. Couldn't think. I thought he was exaggerating. He lives in that modest apartment complex. The father isn't on any social registers. There was no indication. Because senior military officials maintain low profiles for security reasons. Principal Hayes had never raised her voice at a teacher in 15 years of administration, but she was raising it now. "I have spent the last half hour on the phone with a very polite but very firm aide explaining why a 4th grader was called a liar for telling the truth about his father's service." Through the hallway windows, both women could see movement outside. 3 black SUVs pulled into the school's front circle. Men in dark suits stepped out first. Secret Service or military security. Hayes wasn't sure which. They moved with practiced precision, scanning the area with the kind of efficiency that said they'd done this 1,000 times before. Then from the center vehicle, a man stepped out. He was tall, dignified, wearing full military dress uniform. The dark blue jacket was immaculate. Medals covered his chest in neat rows, each one representing service, sacrifice, campaigns most people would never know about. On each shoulder, 4 silver stars caught the morning sunlight. General Vincent Hughes had arrived. Mrs. Whitmore felt her knees go weak. "Oh God, he's real!" "Yes, Patricia, he's real. And right now he's walking into my school to pick up the pieces of what you did to his son." Inside the classroom, students and parents noticed the commotion outside. "Is that the president?" one kid whispered. "Look at all those security guys." Mr. Bennett, the lobbyist, stood and moved to the window. His eyes widened. That's a 4-star general." The room erupted in whispers. Parents pulled out phones. Students pressed against the windows. Lucas sat frozen at his desk. Through the window, he could see his father walking toward the school entrance, with that calm, measured stride he'd seen 1,000 times. That walk that said nothing rattled him. Nothing scared him. His dad was here. In uniform. Everyone was about to see the truth. Mini cliffhanger. General Vincent Hughes walked through Jefferson Elementary's main entrance like he was reviewing troops. Calm. Measured. Taking in every detail. The security personnel remained outside per his instructions. This wasn't a military operation. This was a father checking on his son. Principal Hayes met him in the main hallway, her hands slightly shaking. "General Hughes, sir. I'm Principal Hayes. I want to apologize." He shook her hand firmly but briefly. "Principal Hayes, I appreciate you accommodating the short notice. I apologize for the disruption to your school day." His voice was professional, controlled, but there was steel underneath, the kind of voice that had commanded thousands of soldiers and didn't waste words. "I understand there was some miscommunication regarding my son's assignment." Behind Hayes, Mrs. Whitmore stood frozen, her face the color of chalk. General Hughes's eyes moved to her. Not angry, just assessing. The way a commander assesses a situation before deciding how to handle it. "You're Lucas's teacher?" Yes, sir. Mrs. Whitmore. General, I want to apologize. There was a terrible confusion about confusion." He let the word hang there. "My son was called a liar in front of his peers for telling the truth about his father's service. Where exactly was the confusion?" Mrs. Whitmore had no response. Her mouth opened, but no words came out. General Hughes continued, his voice quiet but cutting like a scalpel. Ma'am, I've spent 3 decades leading soldiers. One thing I've learned in that time, assumptions about people based on how they look, where they live, or what you think they should be, those assumptions are usually wrong, and they're always dangerous. He adjusted his uniform jacket slightly. The medals caught the light. Each one told a story of sacrifice Mrs. Whitmore would never understand. I've commanded troops in combat zones. I've briefed presidents and foreign ministers. I've made decisions that affected thousands of lives. But right now, the most important thing I need to do is check on my 10-year-old son, who was humiliated for telling his truth. His eyes never left hers. Where is Lucas? The classroom door opened. Principal Hayes entered first, her professional smile not quite hiding the stress in her eyes. Class, we have a very special guest joining us for Career Day. Mrs. Whitmore followed, looking like she might be sick. Then General Vincent Hughes stepped through the doorway. The effect was immediate and absolute. The room went silent. Not classroom silent, cemetery silent. The kind of silent that happens when everyone's breath catches at the same time. Every parent stood without thinking. Mr. Bennett, who regularly dined with senators, actually straightened his posture like a cadet. Dr. Carter, the surgeon, placed her hand over her heart. The military families in the room recognized the rank immediately. 4 stars. You don't see 4 stars walk into an elementary school every day. Lucas saw his father, and everything he'd been holding inside broke open. Dad. His voice was small, broken, relieved. General Hughes's professional demeanor cracked for just a moment. His eyes found his son sitting at that desk, tear-stained and exhausted. He crossed the room in 4 long strides, not caring about protocol or appearances or the 30 people watching. He knelt down to Lucas's level, right there in front of everyone, and pulled his son into his arms. I'm here, Lucas. I'm here. I'm sorry I was late. Lucas buried his face in his father's uniform and cried. Not because he was sad anymore, because he'd been holding everything in for so long, because his dad was finally here, because the truth was finally visible. The embrace lasted maybe 10 seconds. But in those 10 seconds, every person in that room understood what they'd witnessed this morning. A child telling the truth, and being destroyed for it. General Hughes stood, keeping Lucas's hand in his. He turned to face the class, and his voice was calm and professional again. The commander addressing civilians. Good morning. I'm General Vincent Hughes, United States Army. I apologize for the disruption to your career day, but I promised my son I'd be here, and I don't break promises to my son. His voice carried weight, authority, the kind that came from 3 decades of service. He glanced at Mrs. Whitmore, who stood near her desk looking like she wanted to disappear. Ma'am, I understand there was some question about Lucas's assignment. The room held its breath. Mrs. Whitmore opened her mouth, but no words came out. She just stood there, frozen, while the evidence of her mistake stood 6 feet tall in full-dress uniform with 4 stars on each shoulder. Principal Hayes stepped in. General Hughes, please, if you'd like to share with the students about your career, we'd be honored. He nodded once. Thank you. He turned back to the class, Lucas still holding his hand. My son wrote that I'm a 4-star general who served for 32 years. Every single word of that is true. The students stared with wide eyes. Some of the younger kids had never seen a real general before. I've commanded troops in Iraq and Afghanistan. I've served in Korea, Germany, and across the United States. Right now, I help develop military strategy for the Joint Chiefs of Staff. He paused, looking at each student. Lucas also wrote that leadership means serving others, not yourself. He learned that by watching his mother, Dr. Angela Hughes, a pediatric surgeon who saved children's lives while I was halfway around the world. He learned it by moving 8 times, by changing schools 6 times, by spending birthdays and Christmases and Thanksgivings without his father because I was deployed. His voice was steady, but there was emotion underneath. My son didn't exaggerate in his assignment. If anything, he was modest. The truth of what military families sacrifice is harder than anything he wrote on that paper. His eyes moved to Mrs. Whitmore. The entire class followed his gaze. When a child tells you their truth, especially when that truth is difficult or doesn't match your expectations, the first instinct should be to listen, not to assume they're lying because their truth makes you uncomfortable. The room was absolutely silent. Mrs. Whitmore's voice came out as a whisper, but in the quiet, everyone heard it. General Hughes, I owe Lucas an apology. A real one. She turned to face Lucas, tears streaming down her face. Lucas, I was wrong. Completely, utterly wrong. I made assumptions about you and your family based on things that had nothing to do with who you are. I judged you. I didn't listen to you. I didn't believe you, and I hurt you. Her voice broke. You deserved so much better from me. You deserved to be believed. I am so sorry. Lucas looked at his father, who gave him a small nod. Your choice, son. Lucas took a breath. When he spoke, his voice was steady, stronger than it had been all day. Mrs. Whitmore, my dad says everybody makes mistakes. He says the important thing is what you do after you make them. The wisdom in those words, coming from a 10-year-old who'd been humiliated hours earlier, hit everyone in the room. Maybe you could, believe kids more, even when their stories sound too big to be true. Mrs. Whitmore wiped her eyes. I will, Lucas. I promise I will. What happened next changed everything. Deshawn was brought back from the office. General Hughes shook his hand and thanked him for standing up for Lucas. That took courage, young man. Never lose that. Tyler Bennett approached Lucas afterward. I'm sorry I didn't say more earlier. That was really brave what you did. Other students gathered around Lucas, not with pity now, but with respect, with understanding, with the knowledge that he'd stood in his truth even when everyone doubted him. Mr. Bennett, the lobbyist, approached General Hughes. Sir, I work with members of Congress every day. What you said about listening first, I needed to hear that too. Ms. Wilson, who cleaned the Capitol building, shook the general's hand with tears in her eyes. Thank you for what you said about service. Every kind. Principal Hayes made an announcement to the class that would echo through Jefferson Elementary for years. Effective immediately, this school will be implementing comprehensive implicit bias training for all staff members. What happened this morning should never happen again. Mrs. Whitmore nodded, her hand over her heart. I'll be the first to sign up. Then the general did something unexpected. From his pocket, he pulled out a small gold coin, a command coin from his unit. These were traditionally given for exceptional service. He placed it in Mrs. Whitmore's hand. I'm not giving you this for what happened this morning, ma'am. I'm giving it to you for your apology. That took real courage. Use it to remember that growth comes from our mistakes, not our successes. Mrs. Whitmore clutched the coin, nodding, unable to speak through her tears. For the next 20 minutes, General Hughes gave a presentation about military service, leadership, and sacrifice. He answered questions from curious students. He shared age-appropriate stories. He made every child feel important. And at the end, Principal Hayes suggested a class photo. Students gathered around the general. Lucas stood front and center, his hand in his father's hand, wearing the biggest smile of his life. That photo would go viral on social media within 48 hours. But right now, in this moment, it was just a son standing with his dad. Finally believed. Finally vindicated. Finally seen. Mini cliffhanger. That evening, the Hughes family sat together in their modest Arlington apartment. The same apartment Mrs. Whitmore had judged as proof that Lucas was lying. Dr. Angela Hughes had left surgery early when Vincent called to tell her what happened. Now she sat on the couch with Lucas tucked under her arm, still in her scrubs. General Hughes sat across from them, out of uniform now, back in jeans and a t-shirt, just a dad again. "How are you feeling, baby?" Angela asked, smoothing Lucas's hair. "Tired." Lucas leaned into his mother. "But good, I think." "What did you learn today?" his father asked. Lucas thought about it carefully. His parents had always taught him to find lessons in hard experiences. "I learned that telling the truth is really hard sometimes, especially when people don't want to believe you. But you should still do it anyway." Vincent nodded. "What else?" "That people's ideas about you can be totally wrong. But that doesn't mean you should change who you are to fit what they expect." Angela kissed the top of his head. "That's very wise, Lucas." "But Dad?" Lucas looked up at his father. "Yeah, son? Why didn't you just tell the school about your job before? Then this wouldn't have happened." It was a fair question, one that Vincent had been asking himself all afternoon. He leaned forward, elbows on his knees. "Lucas, your worth has nothing to do with my rank. You're valuable because of who you are. You're kind, you're honest, you're brave. I never want you to think you need my accomplishments to matter." He paused. "But I also realize now that keeping such a low profile put you in an impossible position. You shouldn't have had to defend your truth alone. So what happens now? Now we make sure this never happens to another kid at Jefferson Elementary, or anywhere else." That's when everything changed. 3 months passed. Jefferson Elementary looked different now. Not physically, but the culture had shifted in ways that couldn't be measured by test scores or attendance records. Every staff member completed comprehensive implicit bias training. It wasn't optional. Principal Hayes made it a requirement for continued employment. The training covered racial bias, class bias, and the danger of assumptions. Real scenarios, uncomfortable conversations, necessary growth. Mrs. Patricia Whitmore attended every session. She didn't just participate, she helped lead them. In a faculty meeting 2 months after the incident, she stood in front of her colleagues and shared her experience. 3 months ago, I hurt a child because I couldn't see past my own assumptions. I looked at Lucas Hughes and decided his truth was impossible because it didn't match the picture I had in my head of what a general's family should look like." Her voice was steady now, stronger. "I've spent the last few months examining my biases, the ones I didn't even know I had. I've learned that my instincts about students were often just prejudices dressed up as experience." She held up the command coin General Hughes had given her. "I keep this on my desk, not as a trophy, as a reminder that growth comes from our mistakes, not our successes." The training led to real policy changes, new protocol, verify before questioning. If a student makes a claim about their family that seems unusual, the first step is to check with parents, not to interrogate the child. The Student Council, inspired by Lucas's experience, created the Truth and Trust Initiative, a peer support system where students could talk about times they felt unheard or disbelieved. Lucas became one of the founding members. Mrs. Whitmore's classroom changed too. On the first day back after the incident, she gathered her students and created a new classroom charter. The kids helped write it. It hung on the wall now in large letters. "In this classroom, we believe first and question respectfully. We never assume someone is lying because their truth seems impossible. Everyone's story matters." Every student signed it, even Lucas, especially Lucas. Mrs. Whitmore also started a monthly family stories circle. Students could share about their families without judgment. The goal wasn't to compare or compete, just to listen and learn. During one session, Sophia Wilson talked about how her mother took pride in her cleaning work at the Capitol building, how she knew every hallway and office, how senators sometimes asked her advice about the building's history. Mrs. Whitmore listened differently now. She heard the pride in Sophia's voice, instead of dismissing it as less important than other careers. Deshaun talked about how his dad could diagnose car problems just by listening to the engine, how he'd built his small mechanic shop from nothing. Tyler Bennett surprised everyone by saying his dad's lobbying job seemed less important after meeting General Hughes, that he'd started thinking about what service really meant. And Lucas, he talked about military families, about sacrifice, about the kids who move constantly and miss their parents and keep going anyway. The class listened without interruption. That's what changed most. The listening. Mini cliffhanger. The viral photo spread faster than anyone expected. The image of General Hughes in full dress uniform, 4 stars visible, kneeling beside his 10-year-old son, while emotional students and parents looked on. The caption that went with it told the story. How a teacher had called a black student a liar for writing about his father's service, how she'd torn up his assignment, how she'd humiliated him publicly, and how a 4-star general had walked into that classroom to stand beside his son. News outlets picked it up. The story appeared on local news, then national broadcasts. Social media exploded with reactions. Some people focused on the racism, others on the classism, many on the courage it took for Lucas to stand his ground. But the most shared aspect was Mrs. Whitmore's apology and transformation. People were tired of stories where the antagonist faced consequences, but never changed. This was different. This showed redemption was possible. 3 months later, Mrs. Whitmore received invitations to speak at education conferences about implicit bias. She accepted some, declined others, but always emphasized the same message. I'm not a hero of this story. I'm the cautionary tale. But I'm proof that people can change if they're willing to do the hard work. Lucas today is different from the scared 10-year-old who stood at the front of that classroom. He's more confident, still humble, still kind, but no longer afraid to share his truth. He started a peer mentoring program at Jefferson Elementary, where older students help younger ones navigate difficult situations. The first rule of the program: believe first. Question with kindness. His friendship with Deshaun grew stronger. Tyler Bennett became a regular at their lunch table. Even Sophia Wilson joined their group. They called themselves the Truth Squad, kids who committed to listening to each other's stories without judgment. General Hughes attended school events when his schedule allowed, not in uniform, just as Lucas's dad. He wanted his son to know he was proud of him for who he was, not what his father did. Dr. Angela Hughes continued saving lives at Walter Reed, but she made sure to attend every one of Lucas's presentations about military families, because that's what this was really about. Not generals or ranks or positions, but a family that loved each other, and a son who learned that truth, even when it's hard, is always worth defending. The Hughes family went back to their quiet life. But Jefferson Elementary, and everyone who heard Lucas's story, was forever changed. Sometimes the bravest thing you can do is stand in your truth, even when the whole world tells you you're wrong, especially then. Lucas Hughes's story is one child's experience in one classroom in Arlington, Virginia. But it represents something much larger happening in schools across America every single day. Right now, somewhere, a child is being told their truth doesn't matter because it doesn't match someone's expectations. A black student is being questioned more harshly than their white classmates. A child from a working-class family is being dismissed because adults assume they're exaggerating. A military kid is being misunderstood because people don't see the sacrifice behind their calm exterior. And most of the time, there's no four-star general walking through the door to make it right. So the question becomes, what do we do about it? The statistics are sobering. According to the U.S. Department of Education, black students are suspended or expelled at 3 times the rate of white students for the same infractions. Subjective offenses, things like defiance or disruption, account for most of these disparities. Translation: when a teacher has to use judgment about whether a student is being disrespectful, black students are punished more severely. The same study found that 72% of teachers have never received any training in recognizing their own implicit biases. They're making decisions about children's futures based on assumptions they don't even know they have. Another study from the American Psychological Association found that black boys as young as 10 are seen as less innocent and more adult-like than their white peers. They're given less benefit of the doubt, less grace, less childhood. Lucas Hughes experienced all of this in one morning, and his story shows us the real cost. Children who feel unheard in school are 4 times more likely to disengage academically. They stop raising their hands, stop sharing their stories, stop believing their truth matters. That's the invisible damage of bias. Not just the moment of humiliation, but the slow erosion of a child's belief in themselves. But Lucas's story also shows us something else. That change is possible, that people can grow, that systems can improve when we demand better. Mrs. Whitmore could have denied what she did. She could have made excuses. She could have blamed Lucas for being too sensitive. Instead, she did the harder thing. She looked at her own biases. She apologized sincerely. She changed her classroom and her approach to teaching. That doesn't erase what she did, but it shows a path forward. Jefferson Elementary could have swept the incident under the rug. Instead, they implemented mandatory bias training. They changed their policies. They created systems to prevent it from happening again. That's how institutions improve, by acknowledging harm and taking concrete action to prevent future harm. And Lucas, he could have let that experience make him small and quiet. Instead, he started a peer mentoring program. He shared his story. He helped other kids find their voice. That's resilience, not because trauma made him stronger, but because he chose to use his experience to help others. So what can you do? First, ask yourself some hard questions. When someone tells you their truth, especially someone from a marginalized community, do you believe them? Or do you immediately look for reasons to doubt? When a child shares something that seems unusual or impressive, is your first instinct to celebrate them or to question whether they're exaggerating? When you see someone being treated unfairly, do you speak up? Or do you stay silent to avoid making things awkward? These aren't comfortable questions, but they're necessary ones. Second, take action. If you're a parent, talk to your child's school about implicit bias training. Ask what policies they have to protect students from discrimination. If you're a teacher, examine your own classroom. Are you giving every student the same benefit of the doubt? Or are your assumptions affecting how you treat them? If you're just someone who heard this story and felt something, share it. Conversations change culture. The more we talk about these issues, the harder they are to ignore. And finally, teach the children in your life that their truth matters, that they don't have to shrink themselves to make adults comfortable, that standing in your truth, even when it's hard, is always worth it. General Vincent Hughes didn't walk into Jefferson Elementary that morning to humiliate a teacher. He walked in to stand beside his son, to show Lucas and every child watching that truth matters, that you matter. The question now is, what will you do with that message? Will you scroll past this story and forget it by tomorrow? Or will you let it change how you listen, how you believe, how you treat the people around you? Because here's the truth that Lucas Hughes learned at 10 years old. One person standing in their truth can change an entire system, but only if the rest of us are willing to listen. So let me ask you, have you ever been disbelieved when telling your truth? Have you ever watched someone else's truth get dismissed because it didn't match expectations? Have you ever stayed silent when you should have spoken up? Drop your story in the comments. Share this story, not the sanitized version, the real version. Because children like Lucas Hughes are standing in their truth right now in classrooms across America, and they need us to believe them. They need us to listen. They need us to do better. Subscribe to channel. Your truth matters. You matter. Don't let anyone make you forget that. Stand in your truth. Fight for justice. Demand accountability. Stay just. Stay loud. Stay free.